In the memories of more than 60 million Americans in the 1960s, Monday nights were not complete without the gaunt face, wide, startled eyes, and the gleaming police badge of Barney Fife. Don Knotts turned this character into an immortal symbol of endearing clumsiness, a man who always tried to appear important but trembled in every situation. With 5 prestigious Emmy Awards, he was not just a comedian. He was a spiritual remedy for an entire generation longing for peace. Yet when the cameras stopped rolling and the studio lights went out, the man who brought laughter to all of America stepped back into his own darkness. Behind the humorous facade was a harsh reality the public had never known. Don Knotts struggled with chronic anxiety and panic attacks that haunted him from deep within his subconscious. This contrast was painfully surreal. While Barney Fife made the world laugh uncontrollably with his supposed timidity, Don Knotts in real life fought to avoid being overwhelmed by insecurity and hypochondria. Every burst of audience laughter was like a mask that helped him conceal an inner world filled with scars, pain that no comedy script could ever fully express. To understand why such a sensitive man chose to stand before millions to make them laugh, we must turn back to West Virginia in the 1920s. There, a child learned to use humor as a shield to survive the most terrifying storms within his family. Born in 1924 in the impoverished region of West Virginia, Jesse Donald Knotts entered life not with lullabies, but with screams and chaos. His father, a man ravaged by schizophrenia and severe alcoholism, frequently descended into horrifying delusions. There were nights when Don curled up in a dark corner, trembling as he watched his father hold a knife and shout at the ghosts in his mind. Their home was not a sanctuary, but a battlefield of fear where safety was a luxury. It was within that suffocating environment that Don Knotts accidentally found an escape: humor. He realized that when he did something funny, the tension in the house seemed to ease. Laughter became his shield, helping a frail, shy, and often bullied child find some sense of self-worth. He began teaching himself ventriloquism, using his puppets to say the things that the timid boy Don would never dare to express. A major turning point came when World War II broke out. Joining the military, Don did not carry a gun on the front lines, but a microphone on stages entertaining soldiers. Amid gunfire and the constant presence of death, he witnessed the miraculous power of laughter. It could soothe pain and restore hope to young soldiers. In that moment, Don understood that his destiny was not to hide in the shadows, but to stand in the spotlight and bring joy to others. After the war, carrying both his lingering insecurity and a burning dream, he moved to New York City, the Valley of Giants. Few could have imagined that his thin frame, trembling voice, and perpetually anxious expression, products of his troubled childhood, would become the key to unlocking his extraordinary career. He did not need to act anxious. He simply brought his real fears onto the screen and turned them into comedic gold. In 1960, when he stepped onto the set of The Andy Griffith Show, Don Knotts had no idea he was about to change the history of American television. Initially, Barney Fife was meant to be a minor supporting role. But from the very first scenes, the chemistry between a calm Andy Griffith and a constantly on-the-edge Don Knotts created something magical. Don transformed Barney into a deputy who carried a single bullet in his shirt pocket, but possessed an ego 10 times larger than his slender body. What made Don Knotts truly great was his unique acting style. Audiences roared with laughter at Barney's trembling voice, wide, panicked eyes, and restless fingers. But behind those laughs lay a painful truth. Don was not entirely acting. Those expressions were real fragments of the chronic anxiety and hypochondria he endured in real life. He learned to tame the psychological monster within him, forcing it to serve his art. Every time Barney Fife trembled on screen, it was Don Knotts releasing his own fears into the character. That silent sacrifice earned him 5 consecutive Emmy Awards, an unprecedented record at the time. He became a familiar face at the dinner tables of millions of American families. People loved Barney Fife because they saw in that clumsy officer a reflection of human weakness and imperfection. Don Knotts proved that the pinnacle of comedy is not clever jokes, but the courage to expose one's own vulnerability, to connect with the audience. Yet, at the height of his brilliance, a fatal miscommunication occurred. A tragic misunderstanding led Don Knotts to leave the familiar home of Mayberry, a decision he would later call an obsession and the greatest regret of his life. In 1965, at the peak of his fame with 5 Emmy Awards in hand, Don Knotts made a decision that would forever alter the course of his life, leaving the Andy Griffith Show. But behind that departure was not the arrogance of a star. It was a painful misunderstanding rooted in his own anxious and insecure nature. Don had always believed that his close friend Andy Griffith would end the show after the 5th season, as originally planned. Driven by the fear of unemployment and the cautious instincts of someone who had once known poverty, Don hastily signed a long-term contract with Universal Pictures to pursue a film career. Tragically, right after the deal was sealed, Andy Griffith decided to continue the show for many more years. Don Knotts found himself caught between two worlds. He longed to stay in Mayberry, but strict contractual obligations forced him out of the only home where he truly felt safe. The departure of Barney Fife left an irreplaceable void in the hearts of audiences, and for Don Knotts it was a bleeding wound. Although he achieved a certain level of success in film with movies like The Ghost and Mr. Chicken, he never again found the same brilliance or sense of belonging as when he was alongside Andy Griffith. Every time he saw the show continue to thrive without him, Don was overwhelmed by guilt and regret. In later years, he admitted that leaving Mayberry was the greatest mistake of his life. That regret was not only about his career, but also about losing the psychological stability that the role of Barney Fife had given him. The obsession with a wrong decision worsened his anxiety, seeping into even the most private corners of his marriage, turning his life into a series of tearful ups and downs hidden behind forced smiles. If on screen Barney Fife was an awkward bachelor in love, in real life, Don Knotts was a man who longed to love and be loved, yet was constantly surrounded by insecurity and anxiety. In 1947, as a young man with nothing but unformed dreams, he married Catherine Metz. She was his first anchor, standing by him through his most difficult years in New York until he reached the height of fame with 5 Emmy Awards. However, fame proved to be a double-edged sword. The immense pressure of his work schedule and his chronic anxiety created an invisible yet vast distance between them. In 1964, at the peak of his career, their 17-year marriage collapsed. This breakup was not just a divorce on paper. It was a painful personal failure for Don Knotts, a man who had always longed for a stable family to make up for his shattered childhood. The real tragedy struck 2 years later, in 1966. Catherine Metz passed away suddenly at the age of 38. The news was a devastating blow to Don's already fragile soul. Though divorced, she was still the mother of his children and the one who had witnessed all his early struggles. Her passing left him with deep regret and overwhelming emptiness. Those close to him recalled that Don fell into a period of severe depression, blaming himself for letting anxiety and work destroy the most precious relationship in his life. After a second marriage that also ended unhappily, it was not until his later years that Don Knotts found quiet comfort with his third wife, France Yarborough. She was not only his wife, but also his caregiver and protector of a soul exhausted by psychological burdens. It was France who held his hand, helping him face the devastating illnesses that were gradually draining the last of his strength. The ghosts from his childhood, insecurity, inferiority, and invisible fear, never truly left him. Despite being a legend with 5 Emmy Awards, Don Knotts was constantly haunted by the belief that he was not talented enough, that Barney Fife's success was merely a stroke of luck. His hypochondria kept him in a constant state of extreme anxiety, where even the slightest pain became a sign of impending death in his mind. Cruelly, those fears eventually became reality in the most painful way. In 2000, Don began to notice his vision rapidly deteriorating. He was diagnosed with macular degeneration, a disease that took away his ability to clearly see faces and read scripts, the very things that had been his lifeline. For a comedian who relied on observing the smallest expressions, losing his vision felt like being trapped in a dark prison of his own making. But the greatest trial was yet to come. Not long after, doctors discovered a malignant tumor in his lung. Lung cancer began to erode his already frail body. Those close to him shared that even as pain tormented him physically, Don tried to remain calm and maintain a gentle sense of humor so as not to worry his wife and children. He fought cancer with the resilience of a man who had survived the hell of his childhood. But this time, his opponent was an irreversible fate. In his final days at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, Don Knotts was no longer a shining star. He was simply a weary man seeking peace. His physical decline was rapid, yet his spirit still flickered like a candle in the wind. He spent his last moments revisiting his fondest memories of Mayberry, of Andy Griffith, and of the roses that once bloomed in his life, quietly preparing for a journey he had long anticipated. On February 24, 2006, at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, the world of comedy lost a vital heartbeat. Don Knotts passed away at the age of 81 due to complications from lung cancer. By his side in his final moments were his wife France and his children, the ones who witnessed the giant of comedy gently fold into peace after a lifetime of storms. His passing was as quiet as his real-life personality, in stark contrast to the loud, chaotic energy of Barney Fife that he had embodied. He was laid to rest at Westwood Village Memorial Park Cemetery among other Hollywood legends. On his modest gravestone, there are no inscriptions of Emmy Awards or dazzling achievements. Instead, it stands as a symbol of release. Release from chronic anxiety, from the shadow of his troubled father, and from the fear of illness that followed him for 8 decades. Don Knotts had finally found the peace he had always longed for. The legacy Don Knotts leaves behind is not just the black and white images of the peaceful town of Mayberry. His true legacy is the strength of vulnerability. He taught us that you can tremble, you can be afraid, you can be clumsy and imperfect, and still become a hero in the eyes of others. Every time audiences laugh at Barney Fife fumbling with his single bullet, they are not just laughing at the humor, they are laughing because they see themselves in it, a small human being trying to survive in a turbulent world. Don Knotts spent his entire life playing a fearful man, but in truth he was the bravest of all, because he dared to turn his own pain and anxiety into laughter for humanity. In the end, Barney Fife was not just a character, but a mirror reflecting the deeply human weaknesses within all of us. Click on the video currently displayed on the screen to continue exploring untold stories about other Hollywood legends. Thank you for listening, and see you again on the next emotional journey.